of us who have opportunities, we cannot continue to pretend that we do not have an unemployment problem in Kenya. We have millions of young people in Kenya out of school, out of college, out of universities. They are doing nothing because they have no opportunity to work, because there have never been any programs to make sure that they have an opportunity to work.
Kwa hivyo Rais, wewe endelea na kazi yako. Wale kwa judiciary wakikusumbua, tafadhali tuachie. Kama wabunge tunyoroshane na wao. Tuwanyoroshe ama tusiwanyoroshe?
All right, the President and the leader of majority at the National Assembly talking about the decision that has just happened last week on Friday, the Court of Appeal giving instructions that indeed they cannot continue to stay the orders that were given by the High Court that found the housing levy to be unconstitutional, null and void. And to help us walk through this journey is the chairperson of the Finance and Planning Committee, Kuria Kimani, and Senator Moses Kajong of Homa Bay. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Great. Let's begin with you, Honorable Kuria Kimani, because you've been overseeing the public participation. So far, you are coming to the end of this and now almost retreating to write your report. First of all, what do you make of the views that have been presented to you, including those that say this is not the right way to go about it, but also you should look for alternatives, especially if you're looking for resources to do the affordable housing program?
Thank you very much, Sam, for having me this evening. So first of all, we started this public hearings on a very misconception view. Because at that time, there was court orders that were issued by the High Court barring public participation on the affordable housing bill. And it took us quite some time, even before the media houses and the public understood that the court orders that were issued were not against the public hearings that we were conducting through the 19 counties that we did in the last 15 days. Because at the end of the first session of this Parliament, the Leader of Majority tabled a bill on the affordable housing bill that was referred to a joint committee of that of Finance and National Planning and that of Housing, Public Works and Urban Planning. And in their advert, they said that we invited members of the public to give their views on the affordable housing bill, and there were 3 modes to send their views. They would either do an email to the clerk of the National Assembly, or drop a physical copy of their memoranda, or do a letter through the postal address box of the National Assembly of the Republic of Kenya. And some individuals in their rightful exercise of the right of our constitution went to court and rightfully obtained court orders, and those court orders barred Parliament from conducting public participation in a way that was anticipated, that was advertised in the advert that was placed on the 3 Gazette notices of national circulation. And after that, Parliament had to sit back and think. So Parliament has a responsibility of lawmaking. And there is a court order barring us from conducting public participation, or that would mean that another arm of government did not have a right, or was being barred from conducting its constitutional right, which meant consequently that if Parliament would not make a law on the affordable housing levy, even as it was dictated or emphasized by the court ruling, then that meant that no any other arm of government could make a law on affordable housing. And so we got ourselves thinking.
Whose interpretation was that?
Legally, so same. We have 3 arms of government. So the legislative arm of government, which concerns the National Assembly, makes laws. The judiciary interprets the laws. So we had time to. The media reported that Parliament cannot conduct public participation on any law, on affordable housing law. That was what. That was why you.
Honorable Kuria, I want to allow your time to make your point.
That is what you reported. So we got to interrupt to interpret what did the judgment say. So the judgment said that's the difference between us and the media houses. Parliament read the law in full. And we read the law and said, the rule said, we have halted public participation on the affordable housing bill for the following reasons. In the way that is had been advertised, it disadvantages marginalized persons and persons living with disabilities from making their views for this. Because why? Because the public participation, as it has always envisioned by every public, every public participation has been carried out by Parliament, is through you send memoranda by email, by postal address, or deliver physical copies. And you are invited now to give physical appearance. And every time Parliament or National Assembly, for that matter, let me speak for National Assembly, my colleague here might speak for the Senate, has always conducted public participation in Nairobi. And the ruling said that would be discriminatory because people like marginalized communities, people with disabilities, or people who are not as academically endowed as to do an email or to do a post or letter will not have their views heard.
Right.
So when we interact with the judgment, we concluded as Parliament, and I mean as a National Assembly, not as Kenya Kwanza or anything, as a National Assembly, that for us to conduct our legislative work, then we must abide with the court order. And that's why we decided that now we're not going to do public participation in the traditional way Parliament does it. We're now going to do public hearings.
Okay.
And we're going to do public hearings across counties. And the least we could do is sample out of for 7 counties, which counties can we do, and we went there and listened to the views of the people.
And that's why I asked, so who made that decision that this is the correct interpretation of the High Court decision?
Remember, there are 3 arms of government,
Yes, there are. So who made a decision that this is the public participation you're going to do?
Parliament. And
who's Parliament? Parliament was on recess. Who?
Specific National Assembly. You know, the arms of government, just like the executive, you know, in the executive, everyone is entitled to 1 month leave, whichever office they hold. Even the president should do a 1 month leave.
That is true.
Irrespective of whether Parliament is sitting actively or not, the institution of Parliament sits in perpetuity.
So who made that decision?
Parliament.
Who?
Parliament.
So who is Parliament? I mean, define it, because as far as receiving the affordable housing bill, it was tabled in Parliament, isn't it?
Yes.
And committed to the relevant committee or committees. And of course, after that, there's the committee now to work out a formula of how to do the public participation. So who made that decision in interpreting the court ruling?
So let me tell you the procedure of Parliament. So that assignment was granted to 2 committees. The Committee of Finance and National Planning and that of Housing and Public Works and Urban Planning. And the express instruction of the Speaker was that, first of all, Parliament or National Assembly sits in perpetuity, irrespective of whether we are on recess or not. However, for us to have an official sitting, we have to have express permission from the Speaker of the National Assembly. So once this was, once the assignment was dedicated to us as a Committee of Finance and National Planning, we sought the leadership of who is the originator of the bill. The bill is originated by the leader of Majority Party, who is Kimani Ichung'wah, who is the leader of government business in the National Assembly. So we sought his guidance and said, now fine, we have this business before us, can it wait for recess to end or not? And he sits in the leadership, and the leadership consists the House Business Committee. So the House Business Committee of the National Assembly, which is outside any political leadership in the country.
So is it Kimani Ichung'wah who decided that public participation?
No, it is the House Business Committee of the National Assembly.
House Business Committee. It sat and made a decision.
Yes.
Are you aware of that, Senator Kajwang? But also, what should happen when a court order is issued in the manner that this was done? Then the independence of an arm like Parliament, what should it do?
Thank you, Sam. First of all, the essence of public participation is to get the views of the public on a particular piece of legislation with a view to either upholding that legislation the way it is or throwing it out. And you've seen, even this evening, a lot of people have come with views that do not support this particular bill. And I hope that my brother will take into consideration those views that have come from concerned citizens, and that this is not just a cosmetic exercise. It was quite disingenuous of the National Assembly to purport to initiate public participation on this bill when there are still very important matters for consideration before the courts of law. There were two arms or two legs to the matters that were taken before the courts. There were issues of procedure, and there are issues of merit and constitutionality of this particular approach that the government wants to force down our throat. First of all, if you look at procedure, whatever my brother is doing is dead on arrival. Because if you look at the memorandum of objects in that particular bill, Kimani Ichung'wah says that this bill does not affect counties, that this is just a policy framework. But when you go to the Constitution, the fourth schedule clearly delineates the functions of county governments, which includes housing. So housing is a concurrent function between national and county governments. So from a procedural perspective, this is a bill that ought to have come through the Senate so that the Senate can ensure that the interests of counties and their governments have also been taken into consideration. But when it comes to the merit, there are those petitioners who have pointed out that this bill violates Article 40 of the Constitution that talks about the right to property, and that the state cannot then become a nanny to citizens to decide where you live, how you live, and what kind of house you're going to stay in. Supposing the Court of Appeal, supposing the Supreme Court was to agree with the petitioners on the issues of procedure, that this matter should have gone to the Senate, and on the issues of merit, that this particular bill offends Article 40 of the Constitution. And my brother Kimani is already spending public funds in many, many public hearings. What then will be the value for money for that exercise that he's undertaking, which could not wait for the outcome of the matters that are before the court? And it is not the first time that government has found itself in this situation. When we were in the last parliament with the last government, we were very enthusiastic about the BBI. And we thought that it was one of the most comprehensively, consulted documents and pieces of legislation. But the courts had different ideas. And we were able to say, wait a minute, because, sometimes the judiciary is like a bump on the road. It brings to your attention that you might be on the wrong path. How I wish that we could have been patient enough to ensure that we first get a clear jurisprudence, clear decisions from the courts of law, so that if we are doing a new bill, because the courts cannot stop us from coming up with a new bill, but the new bill would address the issues that have already been clearly decided on by the courts of law.
Just a moment. Senator Kajwang, you say that Parliament, the National Assembly is wrong on saying that this bill does not affect counties. How should a decision be reached that this bill affects counties or not?
There is Article 110 that requires concurrence between the speakers of both houses, that before any bill is introduced in either house, the two speakers need to sit down and concur whether the matter affects counties or not. And Sam, we've been in court.
Was that done?
The Senate, I've seen the publication date of this bill is 4th of December. And 4th of December, the Senate was in recess. In fact, the entire Parliament was in Kigali for the East Africa Legislative Assembly Games. So we have no record, we have had no communication from the Speaker of the Senate that there was concurrence on this bill. And this, remember, just 2-3 years ago, it led to the throwing out of more than 20 pieces of legislation. Just the impunity of thinking that certain persons are above the law. The impunity of thinking that because the president wants something done, that we can cut corners and avoid the Constitution. This Constitution, and I must repeat it for all those who are listening and for my brother Kuria, that sometimes we might want to move very fast and get to the destination, but there is no shortcut. The route must be through the Constitution. And for lack of concurrence on this bill, and for lack of referral to the Senate, and for lack of respect to the fourth schedule of the Constitution that has made housing a concurrent function between county and national governments, this bill, that whatever Kimani is doing, is a waste of public resources.
I don't know how you respond, Honorable Kuria, because I think there was actually a court decision that said any bill before it's considered or said to be affecting counties or not, there has to be that concurrence. Would you know if this happened before the Assembly?
So before I get to concurrence, so just before we started our public hearings, I knew that I would be personally liable if I broke the law. And at that point, I sought the legal advice of our legal officers at the National Assembly. And just before we started our public hearings on the Affordable Housing Bill in Narok, the day before, there was actually a ruling made by the High Court of Kisumu that said expressly that the courts did not stop public hearings in the way that the National Assembly, in the way it was conducting its public hearings, was conducting it. That what they had stopped was the previous model that I started by explaining, where we talked about send a memorandum to Parliament, send an email letter, send a postal address, or deliver a physical letter. Because they said they had two reasons. One, it was going to disadvantage the marginalized communities, and two, it was going to make sure that it wouldn't reach out to as many Kenyans as it have done. So by the time I conducted the first public hearing on the Narok Affordable Housing Bill, I had a court ruling delivered either that morning or the previous day, giving me green light. And you can check your facts right. I am 100% of that. Secondly, there are several ways of how a bill of parliament gets its life to the floor of the House, or her life to the floor of the House. Let me call it she, because a bill of right gives life, so it must be a she. So the one of them is through a private member's bill, or through a committee bill,
right,
or through a government bill, or through a public petition. A bill of parliament can arise from either House of Parliament, either the Senate or the National Assembly. And I'll tell you about the National Assembly because those are rules I have taken time to read and interpret and align myself with. So once now the bill is published and goes to first reading, the first question is, does this bill involve counties? And that is when the decision is made. But the decision of whether the bill involves counties is not made at inception. What we have now...
Wait a minute. So the decision is made at first reading?
It's made after the bill has been published. Let me correct myself. The bill is made as it has been published. The first decision that's made before a bill is published, like what I have now, called the Affordable Housing Bill, is it a money bill or not? And this decision is made by the Budget and Appropriations Committee through the help of the budget, the Parliamentary Budget Office. So when they say that it is a money bill, then it has to be approved by the Budget Committee before it is published. If it's not a money bill, then anybody can come up with a bill. Then it is through the process of the bill that it is decided whether this bill needs to relates to the counties or not. But by the time the bill is published, and trust you me, what we have now as the Affordable Housing Bill is just a leader of majority bill that just had the first reading at the National Assembly.
So when is the decision? You're confusing me there. First of all, is it a money bill or not?
It is a money bill. Because, by the time that, if you check page, let me hope I can get faster than you. So there's a money bill because, the enactment of, it reads here, statements on the financial implication of the bill. The enactment of this bill shall occasion additional expenditure of public funds to be provided for in the estimates. So the moment that this mentions that it is a money bill. That is the first direction it takes.
So that means it must originate at the National Assembly.
It must originate at the National. It cannot originate now at the National at the Senate. So in that case, Senator here is wrong because there is no way that this.
Just hold on, Honorable Kuria. So was there concurrence with the Speaker of the Senate whether it affects counties or not?
For the bill to be published, remember, our Constitution mandates anybody, and I mean anybody, including a member of minority party, a member of majority party, a private member, or even a private citizen to come up with a bill. So this is as good as, let me call it as good as paper. Because
okay, so just hold on.
Until that time,
the public participation, and you write a report. Where does that report go?
So after this report is tabled, it's tabled in the National Assembly.
Yeah.
And after the report is tabled in the National Assembly, it goes to the House Business Committee. Who now the House Business Committee now prioritizes. Is this bill important? Does it affect
counties? If it's important, it goes to what stage?
No, whatever, it goes now to the second reading. And at that point, is there a decision whether it affects counties or not? Yes, that's where the decision is made. If it affects counties, then there's going to be a concurrence between the National Assembly and...
At the second reading?
Yes, that's when that decision is made.
Okay.
No, I think that is not true. I'm looking at Article 110 of the Constitution of Kenya. It talks about bills concerning county government. And Article 110.3 that I'd referred to says that before either House considers a bill, the Speakers of the National Assembly and Senate shall jointly resolve any question as to whether it is a bill concerning counties, and if it is, whether it is a special or an ordinary bill. And the Constitution goes further to define a bill concerning county government, meaning a bill containing provisions that affect the functions and powers of county governments as set out in the 4th schedule. And I've just pointed out that housing is a function that has been granted to county governments in, concurrently with the national government. So the Budget Committee or Honorable Ichung'wah cannot rewrite the Constitution. It is very clear. And a decision has been made in the High Court relating to that matter. And you remember that 20 pieces of legislation were thrown out because of lack of concurrence, and the courts gave Parliament, the National Assembly and Senate, a time frame to ensure that they regularize that issue of concurrence. And when Kuria talks of that decision can be made later, it cannot be made later. The consideration of a bill by a House is at the point of first reading. For a bill to be read a first time, that determination must have been made. For Kuria to conduct public participation, that bill must have been read a first time. So before a bill is read a first time, Article 110.3 must have been exercised. You don't need to have gone to Harvard to interpret that provision of the Constitution. And I think that we must be clear to the nation that these guys are wasting public resources in pursuit of an exercise in futility.
But do you say that even if it's on the question of policy, because the bill says that this is just affecting the policy, are you still insisting, even if it's just policy, it must be taken to the Senate?
Policy and legislation are two distinct instruments, Sam. In fact, you remember just last week, the courts made a decision in a matter that Omtata took to court. Omtata was challenging the government policy on leasing, and he was saying that policy should have been brought to Parliament. And the courts ruled that policy is not part of the statutory instruments as defined under the Statutory Instruments Act. This is legislation. This is not policy. And you cannot try to be clever by going to memorandum of objects and saying that this is just a policy framework. Housing is a function of county governments. And for those of us, some people are watching who live in houses that were built by defunct municipalities. In more advanced countries and organized countries, you find boroughs and municipalities are the ones who are given the housing responsibility. If you look at Nairobi, back in the days when systems were working, it was the local governments that were building houses, social houses. You find them in Nairobi, you find them in Kisumu, you find them in Nyeri, you find them in Nakuru, you find them in Mombasa. And that is why, when we came up with the devolved systems of government, we said there is a level of housing that can be done by county governments, but then there are the grand housing projects like the ideas that Kenya Kwanza has that the national government can do. This is a matter that affects county governments, and unless they retract, they are wasting public funds going around the country.
So Sam,
yes, Mheshimiwa.
I'm really measuring my words here because once you are a legislator, the roles of Parliament, whether you talk about the National Assembly or that of the Senate, is make laws. And we have three sources of laws. And let me repeat it, and that is the objects of the Constitution. The people elect an individual to go and make laws on their behalf. And anybody can make a law on anything. So at what point now are you telling me that now, because we are dealing about, and even that aside, the Finance Act, that was the most litigated piece of legislation in the history of Parliament.
Sure.
The housing levy was thrown out for two reasons. That one, it was discriminatory, and two, in fact, it was mainly because it was discriminatory, because it discriminated against salaried from unsalaried employees.
Right.
But at some point, there was a show of a letter of concurrence between the National Assembly Speaker and the Speaker of the Senate. And I know, Senator...
I know the story behind it.
I don't know.
I wouldn't say it. I'll only say it on the floor where I've got privileges,
yes,
not on air.
I don't want to go...
But the Finance Act does not require concurrence, does it?
It actually does.
How so?
It actually does. Because the finance bill touches across many pieces of legislation. You know, the Finance Act of 2013...
But it's about raising revenues, which is the purview of the National Assembly.
For example, one of the things that has been even on the public domain recently is an amendment to for example, an amendment to the Roads Act, an amendment to NACADA Act, and an amendment to the KRA Act. So even if it is a piece of legislation that should concentrate on raising revenues, usually, consequently, and I'm saying this because that bill is, I signed it, it's labeled my name, affects many acts of parliament. It actually
so there was concurrence.
Does amendment on several pieces of legislation.
So there was concurrence, that's what you're saying?
That for sure.
On finance bill?
At what point?
Exactly, tell me, at what point?
As a senator.
No, you tell me. You're raising the claim.
Because after the bill is tabled in parliament...
No. Don't tell me the procedure. Tell me.
It is after first reading.
Just hold it. Finance Bill 2023.
It is after first reading.
After first reading, that's when the concurrence was done.
Yes.
And that is okay. So you table for first reading, and you go to the committee, public participation.
No,
consideration by the
time you're getting
committee.
By the time now you're getting to public participation.
Yeah.
Now, because now the look at it this way. In terms of democracy, we elect you some to represent the media society in lawmaking. You come up with a piece of legislation, you bring it to Parliament. In the least, you should bring that piece of legislation to Parliament. And then the rest of the issues are asked at that particular time. And now, when something is not in concurrence, that's when this concurrence is made between our Speaker and the Speaker of the Senate.
It is your statement, Honorable Kuria, that after first reading, there's concurrence between the two speakers on how it affects counties.
Yes.
So where did the text saying that this bill does not concern counties, where did it come from?
So
it is already in the bill that was read the first time.
So for the finance bill, not the Finance Act, we got concurrence from the Speaker of the Senate that the bill did not concern counties and therefore didn't have to go to the counties.
No, I'm talking about the Affordable Housing Bill 2023. It has the text. That this bill does not concern counties. This is the bill that was read the first time. But the decision that it concerns counties was made after the first reading. How?
I think that's way beyond my pay grade.
even though Sam, I like what Kuria has brought up, because as a chair of finance, I agree with him on the matter of the finance bill having provisions that affect counties. The mistake we made in the past, and I hope that my friend can cure it, if he can convince Treasury and the national government to cure it, is that we take the finance bill as an omnibus, and we take advantage of it to change so many laws. Some laws that do not need to be changed at that point in time. It is sneaked into the finance bill because, people, the technocrats, they know that in the fine print, parliamentarians are just going to pass it. So when Omtata went to court on this particular matter to challenge the finance bill having provisions relating to devolved functions, the Speaker of the Senate was put to task to confirm whether there had been consensus. And I know that he swore an affidavit, and I don't want to get into that, but some of the concurrence that was, if indeed it was obtained, it was after the fact. Article 110.3 makes it mandatory. It is obligatory. The courts cannot rewrite it.
Okay.
The courts cannot interpret it differently. And how I wish that my friends would just be prudent, because these things are black and white.
Okay.
That they would have just gotten that out of the way. They would have processed this through the National Assembly and the Senate, because I also agree that there's nothing that stops Parliament from coming up with new legislation, even though prudence, good judgment and good wisdom would dictate that you first wait for the contentious issues to be determined, so that you don't repeat the same mistakes.
So affordable housing would fall under the Departmental Committee of Housing, isn't it?
Yes.
So what is Finance and Planning Committee doing debating this bill?
Yes. Our standing orders in the use of Parliament. So a bill of Parliament can be assigned to a departmental committee or a joint departmental committee. So the only reason why this is a joint committee, and by the way, let me correct this. The Affordable Housing Bill is not a bill of the Departmental Committee on the Finance and National Planning. It is a bill on a joint committee of finance and finance planning, and that of housing, public works, and urban planning. And the reason is this, and if I were to raise an example of a piece of legislation that we passed, I think a few months ago, the anti-money laundering bill, which touched across several sectors. It had issues that were related to the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. It had issues on Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning. And if I remember correctly, it even had something on Lands Committee. Right. So if a bill has clauses that are related to a different committee, then it is referred to a joint committee. And that essentially means...
So tell me, what are the provisions in the Affordable Housing Bill 2023 that would concern the Finance and Planning Committee?
It is mainly the 1.5% housing levy, because that is a finance matter that affects the salaries of the employed people of this country. That and consequently, that also relates...
What's the mandate of the Finance and Planning Committee?
Oversighting collection of revenue in the country. So the housing levy is the housing levy is an addition of revenue collection for the Kenya Revenue Authority of the Republic of Kenya. And consequently also, in fact, the bill proposes that 2%...
really revenue? I thought you are concerned about financing operations of the Consolidated Fund. I could be wrong, but...
Which is the revenue. And second...
housing levy does not go to the Consolidated Fund, does it?
Remember, okay, fine. In addition, the housing levy is amending the Finance Act of 2024. And the Finance Act of 2024 provides that an employer shall deduct 1.5% of the gross revenue of every employee, and the employer shall deduct shall remit 1.5% of the gross revenue of the employees to the Consolidated Fund for this purpose. The Act of Parliament that this bill is amending is the Finance Act of 2023. And who is the sponsor of the Finance Act of 2023? It is myself through the Departmental Committee of Finance and National Planning.
So this is a bill?
Let me try again. So if you check the provisions of this affordable housing bill, it is amending. Part of the proposals is a anonymous bill. It has new provisions.
Okay.
But in addition to the new provisions, it is also amending the Finance Act of 2023.
So is it amending in text or as a consequence?
It's actually amending in text. And not just that. It actually mentions, even if you'll forget everything else, my good friend Sam,
yep.
It is allocating up to Section 11 of the bill, of the Affordable Bill, up to 2% of the money is to be collected as opposed to be collected by the Kenya Revenue Authority. And Kenya Revenue Authority is oversighted by the Departmental Committee of the Finance and National Planning. So as long as you're talking about revenue, talking about a levy, and remember, by the way, this is the first time ever, because if I use those words, the legislation that this is supposed to give reference to is section, I think 81 of, I may have quoted wrong, of the Finance Act of 2023 that provides for the housing levy. So it says that not outstanding the affordable housing levy as proposed by the Finance Act of this is what you propose. The bill does not repeal. This bill does not repeal the Finance Act of 2023.
Okay.
So it just amends partially the Finance Act of 2023 as far as the housing levy is concerned. But in addition, it provides for other clauses, like, for example, formation of a board, defining what affordable housing is, how those affordable housing bill.
There's already a finding that that provision of the Finance Act is actually unconstitutional. The appeal is in court, but we don't have a decision as yet.
Yes, but in addition to...
Just hold on. There's a feedback here, Senator Kajwang, that actually the more than 20 laws that had been challenged, there was an overturning of that decision by the Court of Appeal. There's still an appeal at the Supreme Court, but it doesn't say that those laws were rendered unconstitutional.
Well, if there's a pending appeal, then we'll have to wait for that determination by the Supreme Court. But the High Court was very clear on Article 110(3) and its interpretation, and that it should not be obeyed at the convenience of a speaker. It is obligatory. In fact, even now, you know, it appears to Kenyans that President William Ruto's strategy really on this particular matter was to bully the judiciary to ensure that the judiciary does not stop the collection of this levy. Because once that collapsed, and you saw there was a lot of uproar, there was a lot of talk on top of vehicles. It sounded like there was a campaign against the judiciary to the point that the Chief Justice had to coil her tails and go to State House to have a conversation with the President. And I want to laud the judges and the members of the judiciary who have insisted on going by the letter and the spirit of the law and of the Constitution. In the absence of a favorable ruling from the judiciary, you realize that the government is clueless. They have started on a process that violates the Constitution right from the onset. And many Kenyans are asking, what is the crisis? These houses that President Ruto is launching, he came to Homa Bay for an affordable housing program. They were started without an obligatory levy. The projects he was launching in Nakuru, they were started during Uhuru's time without a mandatory levy. The projects in Park Place, in Ngara, they were started without an obligatory levy. In the absence of a mandatory levy, we still have the National Housing Corporation. And the National Housing Corporation...
Do you reckon there's a challenge of revenue in the country, Senator?
Yes, there's a challenge of revenue in the country, and that challenge is not just for the government. That challenge is on the citizens, because it is the citizens that finance government. There is no government revenue. It comes from the activities of businesses, activities of individuals. When you work, at the end of the day, you are probably going to be taxed close to 35%, because remember, pay was increased. If you're earning 800,000 and above, you'd be paying 35%. There is nothing like a squeeze on government revenue. The squeeze is on the revenues of ordinary Kenyans. And what is a crisis? That you have just doubled VAT. The exchange rate, or the Kenya shilling to the dollar, has just lost close to 50% of its value. You have introduced 2.75% on health. You have increased mandatory remittances to the National Social Fund. What is the urgency? What is the crisis that would cause you to hold the country at ransom, to intimidate the judiciary, to capture the legislature, so that my friend Kuria is doing things that are obviously unconstitutional? So what is the hurry?
What would you suggest?
This is what then leads us to the conclusion that this fund is not about housing. It is a slush fund for other purposes. Because in the interim, I have just talked about the National Housing Corporation. Remember, the National Housing Corporation has been managing a fund, and that fund is called the National Housing Development Fund. It is a fund that is supported by appropriations from Parliament. And over the years, the National Housing Corporation has delivered projects, not to the level expected, but many of us can cite National Housing Corporation projects. If you go to Kibra, you see them. If you go to Kisumu and Kanyakwar, you see them. If you go to Nyeri, you see them. We've got the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Corporation, a state corporation that has been set up to ensure that those who are giving out mortgages can do them at a favorable rate. And some, even though Mortgage Refinancing Corporation has not done a good job to publicize what it does, I recently went to a bank, I think it was Housing Finance, and they said that for certain segments, for certain costs of houses, you can get a mortgage at below 10%. Remember, the current prevailing interest rate in banks is close to 16%. We need to strengthen those. The private sector has been telling Kuria that allow us to give us space, give us a proper regulatory space and proper incentives so that real estate investment trusts can become mainstream. Real estate investment trusts are mainstream in places like South Africa. Why can't we have it here? And Kenya is a fairly sophisticated financial country. But finally, we've got institutional funds. A lot of Kenyans have been able to buy land and have been able to develop houses through SACCOs. A lot of Kenyans have been able to buy or do tenant purchase scheme through organizations like NSSF, LAP Trust, LAP Fund are putting up houses. There are so many alternatives that the option of breaching the constitution to please the president is a direction towards anarchy.
Senator, fine, you're talking about now housing, but the president has also spoken that it is beyond housing to creating employment. Indeed, he cites the figures that 130,000 jobs have so far been created. You want to say something, because I want us to take a short break.
Yes, I really want to correct my friend here.
Yeah.
He said that there's a double VAT on VAT. That's false. Our VAT in Kenya has already been at 7%. The only VAT that was subsidized was VAT in fuel. So there has not been any double VAT in fuel. For NSSF, let me tell you something.
Is it a fact that it moved from 8% to 16%?
Yes, the fact that VAT on fuel.
Isn't that a double?
Only. Yes, he said VAT. VAT is on everything. Almost everything in this country is VAT. So him saying that we have doubled VAT is false.
Okay, carry on.
Higher. Then saying that we have increased taxation on NSF and NHIF is false. NSF, let me tell you something. You and I have a privilege that we have a private pension scheme. Majority of employed Kenyans have only one pension scheme called NSSF. Anybody earning an average wage on SSF, the amount of money they take home at the end of their tenure is hard enough to buy them a boda bicycle to sustain them for the rest of their lives. That's a savings. The issue about NHIF, in fact, there's a reduction on the amount of contribution that's made on NHIF, because for the low-income earners, the NHIF contributions is based on household, not on individuals. He's saying that now there was need to ring-fence this money to be used for housing. That's what we're doing on the housing bill. Just make sure that the funds raised on the housing levy...
The contribution on Social Health Insurance Fund is based on household for non-salaried Kenyans.
For National Hospital Insurance Fund. For the low-income earners, it's per household, not per individual. Then...
That is not accurate. If you have a couple and both of them are earning, they are salaried, each of them will contribute. For
low-income earners, okay, for non-income earners, let me tell you, for non-income earners who don't have a salary, for those individuals who don't have a salary that are paying per individual, that's per now household, and that's why they're paying 300 shillings instead of 500 shillings. Senator mentions
that's
about
the minimum,
housing, right? Yes, the National Housing Mortgage Refinancing Company. That's one of the institutions that we oversee as the National Committee on Financial National Planning. Ask any Kenyan, do you know where Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company offices are? Do you know where to get their services? No.
Okay.
Because it's such a premium service for people who already have mortgages.
All right.
Can I just clarify?
No, Senator.
Just give him another analogy that will support.
You give him more time than we did.
No. I'm supporting you on KMRC. I'm supporting you on KMRC because KMRC is not a client-facing institution. KMRC is like Kenya Re. It's like asking someone, have you ever bought motor third party from Kenya Re? So let's not fool the public. Because KMRC sits behind the mortgage providers.
Now we're on the same page.
The note of being on the same page. We'll come back with more, but this conversation continues after a few stories so that you can hear the real details inside the affordable